Chapter 2. Some Aspects of Big Business. Section 1. The Bluff of the Big Shops. Twice in my life has an editor told me in so many words that he dared not print what I had written, because it would offend the advertisers in his paper. The presence of such pressure exists everywhere in a more silent and subtle form. But I have a great respect for the honesty of this particular editor, for it was evidently as near to complete honesty as the editor of an important weekly magazine can possibly go. He told the truth about the falsehood he had to tell. On both of these occasions he denied me liberty of expression because I said that the widely advertised stores in large shops were really worse than little shops. That, it may be interesting to note, is one of the things that a man is now forbidden to say. Perhaps the only thing he is really forbidden to say. If it had been an attack on government, it would have been tolerated. If it had been an attack on God, it would have been respectfully and tactfully applauded. If A had been abusing marriage, or patriotism, or public decency, A should have been heralded in headlines and allowed to sprawl across Sunday newspapers. But the big newspaper is not likely to attack the big shop, being itself a big shop, in its way, and more a monument of monopoly. But it will be well if I repeat here in a book what I found it impossible to repeat in an article. I think the big shop is a bad shop. I think it bad not only in a moral but a mercantile sense. That is, I think shopping there is not only a bad action, but a bad bargain. I think the monster emporium is not only vulgar and insolent, but incompetent and uncomfortable, and I deny that its large organization is efficient. Large organization is loose organization. Nay, it would be almost as true to say that organization is always disorganization. The only thing perfectly organic is an organism, like that grotesque and obscure organism called a man. He alone can be quite certain of doing what he wants. Beyond him, every extra man may be an extra mistake. As applied to things like shops, the whole thing is not a fallacy. Some things, like armies, have to be organized, and therefore do their very best to be well organized. You must have a long rigid line stretched out to guard a frontier, and therefore you stretch it tight. But it is not true that you must have a long rigid line of people trimming hats or tying bouquets, in order that they may be trimmed or tied neatly. The work is much more likely to be neat if it is done by a particular craftsman for a particular customer, with particular ribbons and flowers. The person told to trim the hat will never do it quite suitably to the person who wants it trimmed, and the 100th person told to do it will do it badly, as he does. If we collected all the stories from all the housewives and householders about the big shops sending the wrong goods, smashing the right goods, forgetting to send any sort of goods, we should behold a welter of inefficiency. There are far more blunders in a big shop than ever happen in a small shop, where the individual customer can curse the individual shopkeeper. Confronted with modern efficiency, the customer is silent, well aware of that organization's talent for sacking the wrong man. In short, organization is a necessary evil, which, in this case, is not necessary. I have begun these notes with a note on the big shops because they are things near to us and familiar to us all. I need not dwell on other and still more entertaining claims made for the colossal combination of departments. One of the funniest is the statement that it is convenient to get everything in the same shop. That is to say, it is convenient to walk the length of the street so long as you walk indoors or more frequently underground, instead of walking the same distance in the open air from one little shop to another. The truth is that the monopolist shops are really very convenient to the monopolist. They have all the advantage of concentrating business as they concentrate wealth, in fewer and fewer of the citizens. Their wealth sometimes permits them to pay tolerable wages. Their wealth also permits them to buy up better businesses and advertise worse goods. But that their own goods are better nobody has ever even begun to show, and most of us know any number of concrete cases where they are definitely worse. Now, I expressed this opinion of my own, so shocking to the magazine editor and his advertisers, not only because it is an example of my general thesis that small properties should be revived, but because it is essential to the realization of another and much more curious truth. It concerns the psychology of all these things, of mere size, of mere wealth, of mere advertisement and arrogance. And it gives us the first working model of the way in which things are done today, in the way in which, please God, they may be undone tomorrow. There is one obvious and enormous and entirely neglected general fact to be noted before we consider the laws chiefly needed to renew the state, and that is the fact that one considerable revolution could be made without any laws at all. It does not concern any existing law, but rather an existing superstition, and the curious thing is that its upholders boast that it is a superstition. The other day I saw and very thoroughly enjoyed a popular play called It Pays to Advertise, which is all about a young businessman who tries to break up the soap monopoly of his father, a more old-fashioned businessman, by the wildest application of American theories of the psychology of advertising. One thing that struck me as rather interesting about it was this. It was quite good comedy to give the old man and the young man our sympathy in turn. It was quite good farce to make the old man and the young man each alternately look a fool. But nobody seemed to feel what I felt to be the most outstanding and obvious points of folly. They scoffed at the old man because he was old-fashioned, because he himself was healthy enough to scoff at the monkey tricks of their mad advertisements. But nobody really criticized him for having made a corner, for which he might once have stood in a pillory. Nobody seemed to have enough instinct for independence and human dignity to be irritated at the idea that one purse-proud old man could prevent us all from having an ordinary human commodity if he chose. And as it was with the old man, so it was with the young man. He had been taught by his American friend that advertisement can hypnotize the human brain, that people are dragged by a deadly fascination into the doors of a shop as into the mouth of a snake, that the subconscious is captured and the will paralyzed by repetition, that we are all made to move like mechanical dolls when a Yankee advertiser says, "Do it now." But it never seemed to occur to anybody to resent this. Nobody seemed sufficiently alive to be annoyed. The young man was made game of because he was poor, because he was bankrupt, because he was driven to the shifts of bankruptcy, and so on. But he did not seem to know he was something much worse than a swindler, a sorcerer. He did not know he was by his own boast a mesmerist and a mystagogue, a destroyer of reason and will, an enemy of truth and liberty. I think such people exaggerate the extent to which it pays to advertise, even if there is only the devil to pay. But in one sense, this psychological case for advertising is of great practical importance to any program of reform. The American advertisers have got hold of the wrong end of the stick, but it is a stick that can be used to beat something else besides their own absurd big drum. It is a stick that can be used also to beat their own absurd business philosophy. They are always telling us that the success of modern commerce depends on creating an atmosphere, on manufacturing a mentality, on assuming a point of view. In short, they insist that their commerce is not merely commercial, or even economic or political, but purely psychological. I hope they will go on saying it, for then some day everybody may suddenly see that it is true. For the success of big shops and such things really is psychology, not to say psychoanalysis, or, in other words, nightmare. It is not real, and therefore not reliable. This point concerns merely our immediate attitude, at the moment and on the spot, towards the whole plutocratic occupation of which such publicity is the gaudy banner. The very first thing to do, before we come to any of our proposals that are political and legal, is something that really is, to use their beloved word, entirely psychological. The very first thing to do is to tell these American poker players that they do not know how to play poker. For they not only bluff, but they boast that they are bluffing. Insofar as it really is a question of an instant psychological method, there must be, and there is, an immediate psychological answer. In other words, because they are admittedly bluffing, we can call their bluff. I said recently that any practical program for restoring normal property consists of two parts, which current Kent would call destructive and constructive, but which might more truly be called defensive and offensive. The first is stopping the mere mad stampede towards monopoly, before the last traditions of property and liberty are lost. It is with that preliminary problem of resisting the world's trend toward being more monopolist that I am first of all dealing here. Now, when we ask what we can do, here and now, against the actual growth of monopoly, we are always given a very simple answer. We are told that we can do nothing. By a natural and inevitable operation, the large things are swallowing the small, as large fish might swallow little fish. The trust can absorb what it likes, like a dragon devouring what it likes, because it is already the largest creature left alive in the land. Some people are so finally resolved to accept this result that they actually condescend to regret it. They are so convinced that it is fate that they will even admit that it is fatality. The fatalists almost become sentimentalists when looking at the little shop that is being bought up by the big company. They are ready to weep, so long as it is admitted that they weep because they weep in vain. They are willing to admit that the loss of a little toy shop of their childhood, or a little tea shop of their youth, is even in the true sense a tragedy. For a tragedy means always a man's struggle with that which is stronger than men. And it is the feet of the gods themselves that are here trampling on our traditions. It is death and doom themselves that have broken our little toys like sticks. For against the stars of destiny none shall prevail. It is amazing what a little bluff will do in this world. For they go on saying that the big fish eats the little fish, without asking whether little fish swim up to big fish and ask to be eaten. They accept the devouring dragon without wondering whether a fashionable crowd of princesses ran after the dragon to be devoured. They have never heard of a fashion, and they do not know the difference between fashion and fate. The necessitarians have here carefully chosen the one example of something that is certainly not necessary, whatever else is necessary. They have chosen the one thing that does happen still to be free as a proof of the unbreakable chains in which all things are bound. Very little is left free in the modern world, but private buying and selling are still supposed to be free, and indeed still are free, if anyone has a will free enough to use his freedom. Children may be driven by force to a particular school. Men may be driven by force away from a public house. All sorts of people, for all sorts of new and nonsensical reasons, may be driven by force to a prison. But nobody is yet driven by force to a particular shop. I shall deal later with some practical remedies and reactions against the rush towards rings and corners. But even before we consider these, it is well to have paused a moment on the moral fact which is so elementary and so entirely ignored. Of all things in the world, the rush to the big shops is the thing that could be most easily stopped by the people who rush there. We do not know what may come later, but they cannot be driven there by bayonets just yet. American business enterprise, which has already used British soldiers for purposes of advertisement, may doubtless in time use British soldiers for purposes of coercion. But we cannot yet be dragooned by guns and sabres into Yankee shops or international stores. The alleged economic attraction, with which I will deal in due course, is quite a different thing. I am merely pointing out that if we came to the conclusion that big shops ought to be boycotted, we could boycott them as easily as we should, I hope, boycott shops selling instruments of torture or poisons for private use in the home. In other words, this first and fundamental question is not a question of necessity, but of will. If we choose to make a vow, if we choose to make a league, for dealing only with little local shops and never with large centralized shops, the campaign could be every bit as practical as the land campaign in Ireland. It would probably be nearly as successful. It will be said, of course, that people will go to the best shop. I deny it, for Irish boycotters did not take the best offer. I deny that the big shop is the best shop, and I especially deny that people go there because it is the best shop. And if I be asked why, I answer at the end with the unanswerable fact with which I began at the beginning. I know it is not merely a matter of business, for the simple reason that the businessmen themselves tell me it is merely a matter of bluff. It is they who say that nothing succeeds like a mere appearance of success. It is they who say that publicity influences us without our will or knowledge. It is they who say that it pays to advertise, that is, to tell people in a bullying way that they must do it now when they need not do it at all.